When a modern, highly practical family mysteriously wakes up in the opulent, silk-draped courtyard of an ancient Chinese manor, chaos ensues. While the protagonist tries to navigate the treacherous and cliché waters of historical transmigration tropes, their parents treat the whole ordeal like an unannounced corporate retreat with terrible plumbing. Together, they must figure out how to survive palace intrigue, overly dramatic nobles, and the lack of modern amenities, ultimately realizing that home is wherever the family is, even if that home is currently in the middle of a martial arts dynasty. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the familiar, comforting scent of home, nor was it the sharp, sterile breeze of the air conditioner we had left running the night before. Instead, my nostrils were assaulted by the heavy, cloying perfume of sandalwood, crushed orchids, and something that smelled suspiciously like impending doom. I peeled my eyes open, fully expecting to see the cracked ceiling of my bedroom. Instead, I was staring up at a meticulously carved canopy bed draped in layers of translucent, seafoam green silk. Embroidered cranes flew across the fabric, looking so incredibly lifelike that I half expected them to swoop down and peck my eyes out. I blinked once, twice. I rubbed my temples, waiting for the hallucination to fade. When the cranes remained firmly in place, I sat up, only to find myself tangled in an excessive amount of clothing. I was wearing robes. Not a comfortable oversized t-shirt, but actual literal, historically inaccurate layers of silk robes with sleeves wide enough to smuggle a medium-sized dog. "Hello." I called out, my voice cracking. "Don't hello me," a familiar, exasperated voice yelled from somewhere beyond the silk screens. It was my mother. Who touched the thermostat? And why am I wearing a tint? I scrambled out of the bed, nearly tripping over a highly polished wooden stool that looked like it belonged in a museum, and pushed past the painted screens. There, standing in the middle of an expansive, impossibly ornate room filled with mahogany furniture and porcelain vases, were my parents. My mother was clutching a jade hairpin like it was a weapon, wrapped in layers of crimson silk that made her look like a very angry, very regal empress. My father, on the other hand, was currently on his hands and knees, inspecting the structural integrity of a low wooden tea table. He was wearing flowing blue robes that trailed on the floor. "Dad," I whispered, utterly bewildered. He looked up, pushing an imaginary pair of glasses up his nose. "The joinery here is fascinating. Absolutely no nails. Pure mortise and tenon. But the lack of electrical outlets is going to be a real problem. How am I supposed to charge my phone?" "Dad," I said, my voice rising an octave. "We don't have our phones. We aren't in our house. Look at us. Look at this room." My mother huffed, tossing the jade hairpin onto a silk cushion. "I told your father not to book that weird immersive escape room for the family vacation. I specifically said I wanted a nice, normal resort with a pool and a breakfast buffet. But no, he had to find a cultural experience that." "Mom, this isn't an escape room," I said, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck as the horrible, cliché realization washed over me. I had read enough web novels to know exactly what was happening. The silk robes. The ornate wooden furniture. The smell of incense. "I think we've transmigrated." My parents stared at me in unison. "Trans what?" my father asked, finally standing up and dusting off his knees, though the silk immediately repelled the dust. "Transmigrated," I repeated, feeling slightly hysterical. "It's a thing in stories. You die, or you fall asleep, and your soul is transported into another world. Usually into the bodies of people in the past, or in a book. We are in ancient China. Or at least, a world that looks exactly like ancient China." My mother crossed her arms, her crimson sleeves billowing dramatically. "Don't be ridiculous. People do not just transmigrate. It's highly unscientific. I am going to find the manager." Before I could stop her, she marched over to the heavy wooden doors and yanked them open. Instead of a hotel corridor, the doors opened to reveal a sprawling, breathtaking courtyard. Willow trees wept over a tranquil koi pond, and intricately carved stone pathways wound through manicured gardens blooming with winter plum blossoms. But more importantly, standing just outside the door was a row of at least 10 terrified-looking people dressed in matching gray tunics. The moment they saw my mother, they all immediately dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads against the cold stone floor. "Greetings to the First Madam," they chorused in perfect, trembling unison. "Greetings to the Master. Greetings to the young heir." My mother froze. She looked at the prostrate servants, then out at the sprawling ancient estate, and then back at me. She slowly closed the heavy wooden doors, the loud thud echoing in the sudden silence of the room. She turned to face us, her expression completely blank. She took a deep breath, smoothed down the front of her elaborate crimson robes, and pointed a commanding finger at my father. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice deadly calm. "If I am the first madam of whatever this establishment is, I am instituting a performance review for those people outside. They look terrified, which means terrible management. Second, you," she pointed at my father, "are going to figure out how their plumbing works, because if I have to use a chamber pot, I am walking back to the 21st century myself. And you," she pointed at me, "are going to explain the rules of this transmigration nonsense so we don't accidentally get beheaded." My father sighed, already rolling up his impossibly wide sleeves. "I'll see if I can find the latrines. Do you think they have copper piping?" I just stared at them, a laugh bubbling up in my chest. Stories always made transmigration out to be a lonely, terrifying ordeal where the protagonist had to scheme and plot to survive. They never mentioned what happened when your fiercely pragmatic parents came along for the ride. We might not know exactly where we were, or whose bodies we had hijacked, or what plot we were supposed to be following. But looking at my mother organizing a hostile takeover of the ancient Manor's domestic staff, and my father enthusiastically deconstructing historical architecture, I realized something important. We were going to be just fine. Heaven help ancient China, because my family had arrived. Chapter 1. The heavy wooden doors had barely clicked shut before my mother was in full corporate crisis mode. She paced the length of the expansive room, the crimson silk of her robe swishing with the ominous energy of a shark circling a very confused school of fish. "All right, team meeting," she announced, clapping her hands once. The sound echoed sharply off the polished mahogany walls. "We have a critical lack of intel. We don't know our names, our financial standing, or the corporate structure of this household. We are flying blind, and I absolutely refuse to fly blind." "I'm just trying to figure out how this wardrobe is assembled," my father muttered, his head currently shoved inside a massive, intricately carved armoire in the corner of the room. "Look at this joinery. It's completely seamless. Not a single nail." "Focus, Richard," my mother snapped. She turned her piercing gaze to me. You read these. What did you call them? Transmigration novels. How do the protagonists usually figure out who they are in these situations?" I tugged uncomfortably at my own seafoam green sleeves, trying to find my hands. "Well, usually the original owner of the body leaves behind their memories. Or there's a helpful, incredibly loyal servant who acts as a convenient exposition dump." I paused, closing my eyes and squeezing them tight, waiting for a sudden influx of ancient, sorrowful memories to hit my brain. I waited another second. Nothing happened. I opened my eyes. Okay, so no memories. Plan B it is. My mother marched back to the doors and yanked them open again. The row of gray-clad servants, who had remained kneeling outside, flinched in terrifying unison. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the oldest-looking woman in the front, who was currently trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "You," my mother commanded. "My office. Now." She pointed to the low tea table. The elderly woman scrambled up and scurried into the room, keeping her head bowed so low she nearly gave herself a concussion on the doorframe. My mother gestured imperiously to a silk cushion on the floor. "Seat." The woman collapsed onto the cushion, looking as though she were about to face a royal executioner. "First madam," she whimpered, her voice shaking, "this lowly servant." "Stop with the lowly servant nonsense," my mother interrupted, pulling a bamboo slip and a stick of charcoal from a nearby desk. Evidently, she had already scouted the room for basic office supplies. "We are doing an intake interview. What is your name, and what is your exact position?" The woman blinked, utterly bewildered by the vocabulary. "I am Mamakin. I am the head maid of the inner courtyard, first madam." "Excellent. Mama-chan, I am going to ask you some very basic questions. I want clear, concise answers. No flowery language. Do you understand? Mamakin nodet franticali." "Good. First question. Who are we?" Over the next 30 minutes, My mother conducted the most terrifyingly efficient interrogation ancient China had ever seen. Through Mama Chen's terrified whimpers and confused answers, we managed to piece together our new reality. We were the Lin family. My father was Minister Lin, a man who, according to Mama Chen's polite but telling hesitations, held a high rank in the emperor's court, but was famous for accomplishing absolutely nothing of value. My mother was, predictably, the formidable First Madam Lin, hailing from a ridiculously wealthy merchant family. And I was not a young lord, as the heavy layers of neutral-colored silk had initially made me suspect when I woke up. The young miss is the sole jewel of the Lin family, Mama Chen explained, risking a quick, fearful glance at me. Spoiled? That is cherished beyond measure. You are known as the most pampered young lady in the entire capital. Fascinating, I muttered. A spoiled, wealthy daughter. Well, at least I wouldn't be expected to lead an army or fight in a rebellion anytime soon. And our financial assets? My mother pressed, her charcoal scratching furiously against the bamboo slip. Are we liquid? Do we own land? Mama Chen looked ready to faint from the rapid-fire questioning. The Lin estate is vast, madam. We have chests of silver, priceless jade artifacts, and several highly profitable silk shops in the southern district. At the mention of chests of silver, my father finally emerged from the armoire. He walked over to an ornate, heavy chest in the corner, flipped the brass latch, and threw open the lid. The dull, heavy gleam of neatly stacked silver ingots filled the box. Incredible. My father breathed, his eyes wide. See? We're rich, I said, feeling a massive wave of relief wash over me. No, not the silver, my father said dismissively, actually tossing a heavy ingot over his shoulder. It landed on the floor with a loud thud. He began running his hands reverently over the inside of the empty wooden lid. Look at the grain on this zeton wood. The craftsmanship is immaculate. Do you know how much a solid block of zeton this size goes for? My mother sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of her nose. Write down considerable assets for now. Mama Chen, you may go. But be ready for a full staff audit tomorrow at 0800 hours. Mama Chen practically crawled out of the room. We were the wealthy, useless Lin family. We had no political power, a mountain of money, and apparently, an impending staff audit. The Transmigration survival guide hadn't prepared me for this, but as I watched my mother draft a quarterly business plan on bamboo, I figured the rest of the ancient capital was the one that truly needed to prepare. Chapter 2. Breakfast at the Lin Manor was an exercise in extreme cultural adjustment. Mama Chen had nervously supervised the delivery of several dozen small, exquisite porcelain dishes containing various pickled vegetables, steamed buns, and congee. My father was currently using a pair of solid jade chopsticks to measure the exact diameter of his porridge bowl, muttering about standardizing imperial measurements. My mother was eating with one hand while using a charcoal stick to aggressively cross out unnecessary expenditure lines on a freshly drafted bamboo budget. I was halfway through a surprisingly delicious pork bun when a sudden cold realization hit me. I dropped my bun. It hit the lacquered table with a soft thwack. Wait a minute, I said, my voice cutting through my father's muttering. I looked back and forth between my parents. Where is Leo? My mother froze, her charcoal stick hovering dangerously close to a line item about premium horse feed. She blinked, slowly raising her head. Leo, she repeated. My older brother, I prompted, panic starting to bubble in my chest. Your firstborn son? He fell asleep on the armchair right next to the couch we were on last night. My mother looked down at her bamboo slips, genuinely bewildered. I didn't add him to the initial inventory list. I assumed he was sleeping in. He never wakes up before noon on a weekend. Mom, we transmigrated into ancient bodies. He's not in his bedroom. Before my mother could issue a crisis management directive, the heavy courtyard doors were violently thrown open. Mama Chen practically tumbled into the room, her face pale. First Madam. Master, she gasped, bowing frantically. Young Master Shen has arrived. The guards tried to stop him, but he insisted it was an emergency. She turned to me, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Young miss, your childhood sweetheart is here, and he looks completely distraught. My what? I choked out. Before Mama Chen could explain, a figure burst past the bamboo screens. If I thought I was wearing a lot of silk, this guy was a walking textile factory. He was tall, athletic, and dressed in flowing, expensive lavender robes that rippled around him like water. His long, dark hair was swept up into a pristine jade crown. He was, objectively speaking, the most breathtakingly handsome man I had ever seen, looking like a tragic, romantic hero stepping straight out of a painting. The romantic hero immediately tripped over the raised wooden threshold, flailed his arms wildly, caught his balance on a priceless Ming vase, and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my mother. "You started the family meeting without me?" The voice that came out of the ridiculously handsome face was incredibly whiny, aggressively familiar, and absolutely furious. "Lao?" I gasped. "Yes, it's me. And do you have any idea what I've been through this morning?" Leo shouted, his lavender sleeves billowing as he marched into the room, totally ignoring Mama Chun, who looked like she might faint from the scandal of a man barging into the inner courtyard. "I woke up in a bed the size of a football field," Leo ranted, pacing furiously. "Some guy tried to dress me, and I had to fight him off with a decorative paper fan. I looked in a bronze mirror. Do you know how hard it is to see yourself in bronze? And realized I look like a shampoo commercial model. And worst of all," he slapped his hands against his robes, "I checked my pockets, and I don't have my phone. How am I supposed to check my crypto wallet?" "Calm down, Leo," my mother said smoothly, recovering her composure instantly. She pointed her charcoal stick at an empty cushion. "Sit down. What is your current organizational title?" "They keep calling me Young Master Shen," Leo groaned, collapsing onto the cushion. He looked at me, his eyes widening in sudden, absolute horror. "Wait. My servants, they were crying. They said I was rushing over here in a mad panic to see my beloved." "Please don't tell me." I gave him a sympathetic, incredibly awkward smile. "Childhood sweethearts. That's what Mama Chin just called us. We're probably destined for a tragic, star-crossed romance." Leo stared at me. Then he looked down at his lavender silk robes. Then he looked at my mother. "I'm calling HR, Leo deadpanned, burying his spectacular face in his hands. "This transmigration is a hostile work environment. You guys literally forgot me, and now I have to pretend to be in love with my little sister, so we don't break character and get executed for witchcraft." "Look on the bright side, son," my father offered cheerfully, finally putting down his jade chopsticks. "Does the Shun estate have indoor plumbing? Because if they do, we are initiating a merger." Chapter 3. I started my second morning in the Lin Manor by completely overhauling my bedroom. The heavy, oppressive gold and crimson color scheme was giving me a severe headache. It was the interior design equivalent of being shouted at. "Mama Chin," I said gently, pointing at the heavy silk drapes. "Take all of this down. Do we have anything in a softer palette? Perhaps a muted matcha green, or a pale strawberry pink? I need a calming minimalist environment." Mama Chin looked horrified at the idea of removing the aggressively expensive gold embroidery, but she obediently scurried off. By noon, she had replaced the textiles with soft, breathable linens in pastel tones. I arranged my desk near the window to catch the natural light, feeling much more at peace. If I had to live in an ancient transmigration novel, I was going to do it with a proper, calming aesthetic. My mother, however, was not relaxing. She had summoned Leo back to our estate under the guise of a romantic rendezvous. In reality, she had locked the doors to my newly minimalist room, unrolled a massive blank parchment across the floor, and handed Leo an abacus. "We need a comprehensive risk assessment of the capital's political factions," my mother declared, tapping a piece of charcoal against her chin. "Leo, you are officially the lead data analyst of this alliance. I need you to cross-reference the Lin family's commercial revenue with the Shun family's military influence." Leo stared at the wooden beads of the abacus, as if it were a venomous snake. "Mom, I use statistical software. I write scripts. I don't even know how to use this medieval counting toy. How am I supposed to run any sort of predictive model without a single spreadsheet?" "Figure it out," Mom said ruthlessly. "Consider the bamboo slips your rows and columns. I want a basic pivot table by dinner." "A bamboo pivot table," Leo muttered, rubbing his temples. "This is a nightmare." To maintain our cover, Leo and I were eventually forced to leave the war room and take a romantic stroll through the plum blossom gardens. The servants watched from a respectful distance, whispering and sighing at the tragic beauty of our supposedly profound love. "If you try to hold my hand, I am pushing you into the koi pond," Leo muttered through his teeth, plastering a fake, love-struck smile on his ridiculously handsome face. "Just keep smiling," I whispered back, gazing up at him with manufactured adoration. Recite the multiplication tables. It'll look like we're whispering sweet nothings. 7 times 8 is 56, Leo murmured, gently brushing a fallen plum blossom from my hair with a dramatic sigh. I miss dual monitors. 9 times 12 is 108, I replied, playfully swatting his arm. At least you get your own estate. I'm stuck here trying to stop Dad from dismantling the gazebo to check its load-bearing capacity. Chapter 4. The morning sun filtered through the pale pink linen blinds I commissioned, casting a soft, strawberry-hued glow across my bedchamber. I spent yesterday banishing every heavy, oppressive gold and crimson textile from my sight. In their place, I cultivated a minimalist oasis of muted matcha green cushions and sleek, unvarnished wooden furniture. I desperately needed a calming environment to maintain my sanity in this ancient world. Sitting at my vanity, I relied on a mental focus timer, 25 minutes of deep breathing while visualizing a cozy, lo-fi study space, followed by a 5-minute break. This rhythmic focus technique was the only way I could endure Mama Chun meticulously pinning my hair into an elaborate style. I closed my eyes, letting the gentle brush strokes soothe my nerves as I prepared for the day's inevitable chaos. Our intelligence gathering phase was rudely interrupted by the arrival of the Wang family, our primary political and commercial rivals. Madame Wang, a woman whose polite smile felt sharper than a finely honed sword, brought her arrogant son Wang Hao for a supposedly friendly morning tea. We received them in the main reception hall, a grand room my mother had already begun reorganizing for maximum efficiency. Servants moved silently, pouring hot tea into delicate porcelain cups. Madame Wang observed our household with a critical eye, clearly searching for weakness. Her son fanned himself slowly, his chin raised in an attitude of supreme superiority. I sat next to my mother, keeping my posture rigid and my expression beautifully blank. I had resolved to lean heavily into my reputation as a pampered, frivolous heiress. The tea ceremony felt agonizingly long. I focused on the delicate floral notes of the tea, trying to ignore the bitter undercurrent of Madame Wang's conversation. She took a deliberate sip before setting her cup down with a soft clink. I hear the young Miss Lin spends her time rearranging her room's decor rather than practicing the guqin or embroidering. Madame Wang purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. My Hauer, on the other hand, studies advanced philosophy and classical mathematics. The emperor's scholars are quite impressed with his progress. Wang Hao puffed out his chest, snapping his folding fan shut with a dramatic flourish. Indeed, mother. The pursuit of knowledge is rigorous. In fact, I recently solved a classical puzzle that stumped several junior members of the court. Perhaps the young miss would care to hear it. He looked at me triumphantly. I would love to hear it, my mother said smoothly, giving my ankle a sharp kick under the low wooden table. I forced a polite smile. Imagine a large stone basin, Wang Hao began, pacing the room to ensure all eyes were on him. Water flows into it from a pipe at a rate that increases steadily over time. Simultaneously, water leaks from a crack at the bottom at a steady, unchanging rate. At what specific moment does the water reach the brim? He crossed his arms, waiting for my confusion. I blinked at him. I looked at my father, who was suddenly intensely interested in the structural integrity of his teacup, silently suppressing a laugh. I looked back at Wang Hao. He had not presented a philosophical riddle. He had just described a basic ordinary differential equation. I reached for a spare piece of parchment and a brush. Well, I said slowly, tracing a character on the paper. Assuming the inflow is a linear function of time, alpha t, and the outflow is a constant beta, the rate of change of the volume is simply the difference between the two. I wrote out the differential equation. $frac dv dt equals \alpha t \beta $. I looked up at his blank face and continued. You just need to integrate the net flow rate with respect to time to find the volume function. I wrote the next step. $vt equals \int \alpha t \beta dt equals \frac 12 \alpha t squared \beta t plus c $. Then, you solve for the time variable t when the volume equals the basin's maximum capacity. It is a straightforward quadratic calculation. Dead silence fell over the reception hall. Wang Hao dropped his folding fan. It clattered loudly against the polished floorboards. Madame Wang choked on her tea, staring at the paper. Integrate. Wang Hao stammered, his face pale. What manner of demonic script is that? I smiled sweetly, pouring myself another cup of tea. Oh, just a silly little thought. But honestly, it would be much easier to patch the crack in the basin with some quality mortar, wouldn't it? That is what my father always says. My father beamed proudly. Spot on, sweetheart. Practicality must always come first. The Wang family departed shortly after, looking deeply unsettled. They had come to humiliate a spoiled heiress, and instead received an incomprehensible mathematical lecture and unsolicited plumbing advice. Later that evening, Leo sneaked over the garden wall. He clutched an armful of bamboo slips. I finished the analysis, he announced, dropping the heavy bundle onto my desk. I organized the regional agricultural outputs into tables. The Wang family is heavily over-leveraged in silk production. If Mom shifts our capital to the tea trade, we bankrupt them in 2 fiscal quarters. I looked at the carved bamboo spreadsheets, then at my brother's exhausted face. The Wang family did not stand a chance. Chapter 5. The breaking point for my father occurred on a humid Tuesday morning. Despite my mother's highly efficient reorganization of the Manor's staff, and my own successful efforts to transform my bedroom into a minimalist sanctuary, one glaring issue remained unresolved. The sanitary conditions of these ancient times were truly an absolute nightmare. My father, a man who possessed a profound appreciation for modern sanitation and highly regulated municipal water systems, had been quietly suffering for over a week. He truly despised the porcelain chamber pots. He loathed the manual labor required to perfectly maintain them. Every morning, I watched him stare out over the koi pond with a look of profound, agonizing despair. Finally, he snapped. He threw down his jade chopsticks during breakfast, stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward, and announced that if he could not flush a toilet by the end of the month, he was walking into the nearest river. My mother did not even look up from the bamboo ledger she was currently auditing. She simply took a sip of her jasmine tea and told him that he had full budget approval for whatever infrastructure project he deemed necessary, provided it did not disrupt the newly instituted servant break schedules. Thus began the Great Lin Family Plumbing Initiative. My father immediately converted the western courtyard into a construction zone. He stripped off his heavy, cumbersome silk robes, replacing them with a simple cotton tunic that allowed for maximum mobility. He spent 3 entirely sleepless nights drafting schematics by candlelight, muttering continuously about gravity feeds, water pressure, and the tragic absence of PVC piping. He recruited a dozen of the strongest estate guards and completely repurposed them from their standard security details into a specialized trench-digging squadron. I found him one afternoon standing waist-deep in a muddy ditch, measuring the angle of descent with a makeshift plumb bob and a remarkably accurate protractor he had carved out of a solid piece of mahogany. "We need a constant 2% grade for perfect flow," my father explained to me, wiping a smudge of dirt from his forehead as I offered him a cup of iced plum juice. "If the slope is too steep, the water velocity increases and strips the lining. If it is too shallow, we get stagnation. It is a delicate balance, sweetheart. We are basically recreating the Roman aqueducts, but with hollowed-out bamboo and baked clay joints." I nodded enthusiastically, taking a seat on a nearby rock. I genuinely admired his dedication to structural engineering. However, the rest of the ancient capital did not share my modern perspective. In a world where noblemen spent their days composing poetry, drinking tea, and engaging in subtle political maneuvering, my father's behavior was deeply scandalous. The Minister of Rights was reportedly seen digging holes in the dirt like a common laborer. Within days, wild rumors began to circulate through the city's elite social circles. Because no one could possibly comprehend the concept of indoor plumbing, they concluded that my father was engaging in something mystical. Whispers spread that the eccentric Minister Lin was secretly practicing obscure Taoist alchemy. They claimed the elaborate trenches were actually mystical arrays designed to gather the Earth's spiritual energy. The hollowed-out bamboo pipes were supposedly conduits for immortality elixirs. My mother found the rumors incredibly amusing and immediately capitalized on them, subtly leaking hints that my father was on the verge of a divine breakthrough. This drove up the value of our estate and kept our political rivals completely afraid of interfering with us. But the rumors eventually reached the imperial palace. The emperor, a deeply paranoid man who constantly feared assassination by magical means, decided he could not ignore the gossip. He dispatched his most elite, highly trained shadow guard to infiltrate our manor and uncover the truth behind the mystical arrays. The spy arrived on a moonless night, dressed entirely in black, moving with the silent grace of a predatory cat. He slipped over the eastern wall, bypassed the newly reformed security patrols my mother had organized, and stealthily made his way toward the western courtyard where the mystical energy was supposedly concentrated. Unfortunately for the elite shadow guard, my father was working the night shift. The spy dropped silently from the roof of the gazebo, landing perfectly behind my father, ready to interrogate him. Before the assassin could even draw his poison dagger, my father spun around, shoved a heavy wooden shovel into the man's hands, and pointed toward the unfinished trench. "Thank goodness you are here," my father said, completely oblivious to the man's deadly intentions and dark attire. "I told the foreman I needed another guy for the graveyard shift. Grab that end of the clay pipe and help me secure the watertight seal. We need to finish this junction before the morning dew sets in." The elite assassin, utterly bewildered and caught entirely off guard by the sheer audacity of the request, instinctively took the shovel. For the next 6 hours, the fearsome imperial spy dug trenches, hauled dirt, and learned the fundamental principles of hydrostatic pressure. By sunrise, the plumbing system was perfectly operational. The spy returned to the palace with blistered hands and reported to the emperor that Minister Lin was not practicing treasonous alchemy, but was simply a profoundly strange man obsessed with managing basic human waste. Chapter 6. The Golden Scroll arrived on a brisk Thursday afternoon, delivered by a palace eunuch whose silk robes were so heavily embroidered they looked physically exhausting to wear. He stood in the newly renovated reception hall, now stripped of its heavy drapery and bathed in natural light, and unrolled the imperial decree with a dramatic, sweeping gesture. According to the flowing calligraphy, the Lin family was formally summoned to the emperor's annual autumn hunt. It was an immense honor, a grand display of martial prowess, and a mandatory event for the empire's most prominent noble houses. Missing this event was absolutely out of the question, as it would be seen as a direct insult to the crown. When the eunuch finally departed, leaving the heavy scroll on my mother's minimalist wooden desk, a profound silence fell over the room. We stared at the golden fabric as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. My father was the first to speak, wiping grease from his hands with a plain linen cloth. He had just finished recalibrating the water pressure in the eastern wing of the estate. "I do not know how to ride a horse," he announced casually, breaking the heavy tension. "I have never ridden a horse. I strongly prefer modern vehicles with a reliable braking system, a functioning steering wheel, and airbags. Furthermore, my understanding of archery is entirely limited to the theoretical physical properties of tension, aerodynamics, and projectile motion. I cannot actually shoot a traditional wooden bow." "I took a brief pony ride at a petting zoo when I was 7 years old," I offered, sitting down on a pale green cushion near the window. "But the animal was extremely slow, very old, and a trained handler was leading it the entire time. I am fairly certain the imperial hunt requires galloping through dense, unpredictable forests while simultaneously firing sharp arrows at rapidly moving targets. If they put me on a horse, I will absolutely fall off and break my neck within the first 5 minutes." My mother sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of her nose. She looked at the glowing golden scroll, then tapped her manicured fingernails rhythmically against the smooth wooden desk. She did not panic, because panic was an inefficient use of mental energy. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly, and the familiar, sharp gleam of high-level corporate strategy illuminated her expression. "We are looking at this from the wrong perspective," she declared, picking up a bamboo stylus and pulling a blank piece of parchment toward her. "This is not a sporting event. This is a mandatory, high-level corporate networking retreat. The emperor is gathering all the key stakeholders, political influencers, and wealthy investors in a single, contained location for 3 days. It is a prime opportunity for synergy and business development." I blinkte her. "Mom, they are going to expect us to kill wild animals." "We will simply decline the physical activities," she stated smoothly, drafting a quick bulleted list on the fresh paper. "We will cite your father's recent, highly taxing infrastructure projects. We will claim he is spiritually depleted from his plumbing installations, which the public believes to be mystical Taoist arrays. We are going to treat this hunting trip as a trade show. We will set up a luxurious base camp, invite the other noble families into our tent, and negotiate lucrative trade agreements while everyone else is distracted by the wildlife in the forest. Thus, Our preparation for the deadly, highly competitive royal hunt did not involve sharpening iron-tipped arrows or saddling massive stallions. Instead, it involved aggressive catering preparations. My mother ordered the kitchen staff to prepare massive quantities of easily transportable snacks. We packed delicate lotus pastries, spiced walnuts, dried apricots, and several large ceramic jugs of premium tea. We loaded 3 sturdy wagons with plush seating arrangements, lightweight bamboo folding tables, and several highly decorative, heavily branded banners featuring the Lin family crest. Leo arrived at our estate just as we were finishing the packing process in the courtyard. He looked utterly miserable, draped in heavy riding leathers that were entirely too warm for the afternoon sun. He slumped against the wooden wheel of our main supply wagon, crossing his arms in sheer defeat. My so-called father handed me a massive iron bow this morning. Leo complained loudly, rubbing his sore shoulder. It weighs a ton. He fully expects me to bring back a giant stag. I am a data analyst. I look at numbers on a screen. The only thing I have ever hunted is a misplaced decimal point in a quarterly revenue spreadsheet. If I try to ride that monster of a horse they saddled for me, I am going to die. Do not worry, Leo, my mother said, handing him a clipboard made of thin wood. You are not hunting. You are joining our marketing team. When we arrive, I need you to mingle with the younger generation of nobles. Gather intelligence on their spending habits and casually mention our new tea distribution network. The journey to the imperial hunting grounds took an entire day of bumpy travel. When we finally arrived at the sprawling, picturesque valley surrounded by dense green forests, the sheer scale of the event was overwhelming. Hundreds of vibrant, colorful tents dotted the grassy landscape, with massive banners fluttering in the wind. Muscular horses neighed loudly, and heavily armed guards patrolled the perimeter to ensure safety, while the other noble houses immediately began donning their heavy armor and boasting loudly about their upcoming conquests. The Lin family quietly set up our pavilion. We arranged the bamboo tables beautifully, laid out the expensive pastries, and brewed the premium tea. My father immediately began inspecting the structural integrity of the royal grandstand, pointing out its flawed weight distribution to a group of confused guards. Within 2 hours, our tent became the most popular destination in the encampment. The older ministers, who were secretly just as exhausted by the physical exertion as we were, slowly wandered into our pavilion seeking a comfortable seat and a warm cup of tea. My mother smiled her sharpest, most welcoming smile, offering them sweet pastries while smoothly transitioning the conversation toward bulk export tariffs. We were not hunting deer or wild boar, but by the time the sun began to set on the first day, my mother had successfully cornered the regional market on raw silk, and Leo had secured 3 new investors. The hunt was a massive success. Chapter 7. The second morning of the royal autumn hunt dawned crisp and bright, the chill in the air signaling the changing season. While the rest of the encampment awoke to the thunderous sounds of war horns and aggressive shouting of competitive noblemen preparing for physical challenges, our pavilion remained a beacon of absolute tranquility. My mother established a strict 9 o'clock start time for networking operations, citing the importance of proper rest. We sat around beautifully arranged bamboo tables, sipping hot tea from delicate porcelain cups and eating lotus pastries. Leo sat across from me, looking slightly more comfortable today. He had boldly ditched the heavy leather armor mandated by his new family, the Shuns, and wore a simple, breathable cotton tunic. He was currently reviewing wooden slips, carefully sorting regional tax data gathered from younger lords the previous evening. My mother was deeply engrossed in a complex negotiation with the Minister of Revenue, smoothly convincing the elderly man that investing in our transport network would yield unprecedented dividends next quarter. My father, completely ignoring the high-stakes political maneuvering happening inches away, was thoroughly captivated by a heavy, ornate bronze candlestick he had discovered inside our rented pavilion. Look at the base of this object, my father muttered to himself, lifting the massive bronze structure with both hands. It was nearly 3 feet tall, shaped like a twisting dragon, and weighed at least 40 pounds. The center of gravity is entirely wrong. If you place a standard wax candle on the top tier, the structural integrity is compromised. A slight breeze could tip it over and ignite the tent. It is a severe fire hazard. I need to recalibrate the base plate to ensure proper weight distribution. Outside the tent, rhythmic thundering of horse hooves echoed through the valley as the primary hunting party set off into the dense, ancient forest. The emperor himself led the charge, surrounded by elite guards and the Empire's finest warriors, desperate to secure prey and earn royal favor. We remained comfortably seated on our plush cushions, entirely content to let them exhaust themselves chasing wild animals through the thick underbrush. However, the tranquility of our morning was abruptly shattered just before noon. A loud, chaotic commotion erupted from the edge of the forest. The shouting grew louder, frantic and panicked, accompanied by snapping branches and the heavy, pounding sound of something massive rushing toward the encampment. I stood up, moving toward the entrance of our tent, clutching dried fruit. Bursting through the tree line was an enormous, deeply enraged wild boar. It was an absolute monster of an animal, covered in thick, dark bristles, with razor-sharp tusks gleaming menacingly in the midday sun. It had a broken arrow sticking out of its thick shoulder, fueling its pure, unadulterated fury. The guards stationed at the perimeter scrambled to draw their weapons, but the beast was fast. It charged blindly into the camp, overturning cooking fires, smashing through wooden barricades, and sending fully armed soldiers diving into the mud for safety. Unfortunately, the boar's chaotic path led it directly toward the Lin family pavilion. "Mom, Dad, incoming wildlife!" I yelled, dropping my dried fruit and stepping backward into the center of the tent. The Minister of Revenue shrieked, scrambling under the nearest bamboo table, and covering his head with his hands. Leo dropped his wooden spreadsheets, his jaw dropping in shock as the massive beast barreled toward our open doorway, its small, dark eyes fixed entirely on our lavish spread of lotus pastries. My father was still holding the massive bronze candlestick, entirely absorbed in his impromptu engineering inspection. He had unscrewed the top tier, and was currently rotating the heavy base in his hands, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding just outside. The boar charged into the pavilion, its hooves tearing up the expensive rugs. It let out a deafening squeal, lowering its massive head to gore the nearest obstacle. At that very moment, my father decided to test the rotational balance of the bronze base. He spun around, lifting the heavy metal object into the air to check its symmetry. As he turned, his foot caught the edge of a thick silk cushion. He lost his balance, stumbling forward with a loud, surprised yell. The massive 40-pound bronze dragon swung downward in a wide, uncontrolled arc. The heavy metal base connected squarely with the forehead of the charging boar with a resounding, sickening crunch. The sheer force of the accidental impact stopped the massive beast dead in its tracks. The boar's eyes rolled back into its head. Its legs buckled instantly, and it collapsed onto the pavilion floor with a heavy, earth-shaking thud, sliding to a halt mere inches from my mother's meticulously arranged tea tray. My father landed flat on his back, staring up at the fabric ceiling, groaning in pain. "I knew it," he wheezed, rubbing his lower back. "The weight distribution is completely flawed. It threw off my entire center of mass." Soon, the Emperor and his elite guard arrived. They took in the surreal scene. The Emperor's eyes widened in profound awe. Without a word, he bowed his head respectfully to my oblivious dad. The entire encampment quickly followed suit, whispering about the eccentric Minister Lin, the hidden martial arts grandmaster who could fell monsters instantly. My father sighed, glaring at the dented bronze candlestick. "Structural integrity is ruined," he muttered. Chapter 8. My father accidentally bludgeoning a wild boar with a bronze candlestick caused a massive shift in our family's social standing. Before the hunt, the Lin family was viewed as a wealthy but harmless entity. Following the spectacular incident, the court collectively decided we were a house of hidden lethal talents. The Emperor commended my father's supposed martial arts mastery. Consequently, our political value skyrocketed. We were considered dangerous and highly desirable allies. This newfound prestige caught the attention of the most daunting figure in the inner palace, the Empress Dowager. She controlled marital alliances with an iron grip. Recognizing our rising influence, she decided I required a political marriage to solidify our loyalty. We received the news via a heavily embroidered decree. The Empress Dowager had selected a suitable match, sending his sister to our estate for a formal introduction. The guest was Commandery Princess May, a young woman known for flawless etiquette. Thanks to Transmigration novel tropes, I knew her true reputation. Princess May was the storyline's primary antagonist, a skilled poisoner who eliminated political rivals using subtle toxins. My mother received this information with her usual unflappable calm. Sitting at her minimalist wooden desk in the streamlined reception hall, she simply nodded when I frantically explained our impending guest was an assassin. Instead of panicking, She instructed Mama-chan to prepare afternoon tea. She requested fine porcelain cups and neutral pastries, ensuring no room for foul play. My mother approached the situation not as a fight for survival, but as an opportunity for corporate restructuring. She viewed Princess May as a highly skilled contractor desperately needing a new career pivot. Princess May arrived the following afternoon. Dressed in flowing pale pink silk, she moved with graceful, hypnotic fluidity. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes held a calculating gleam. I sat rigidly on my muted matcha green cushion, aware of the intricately carved wooden box she carried. It supposedly contained premium tea leaves, but I was convinced it held untraceable poison. I held my breath as she elegantly took a seat opposite us. First Madame Lin, young Miss Lin. Princess May greeted us smoothly. I bring greetings from the Empress Dowager. It is an honor to meet the women of such a distinguished household. The honor is ours, my mother replied, pouring hot water into a pristine porcelain cup. She bypassed the wooden box, offering our carefully sourced tea instead. Please enjoy our hospitality. We have much to discuss regarding your brother's proposal. Princess May's sweet smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, lifting the teacup with perfect poise. My brother is an exceptional man. Let us be transparent, Princess, my mother interrupted gently, resting her hands on the table. We are aware of your unique skill set. Your proficiency in botany, chemical extraction, and subtle compound delivery is remarkable. Gossip often attributes the sudden ailments of political rivals to natural causes, but I recognize the work of a brilliant specialist. The porcelain cup in Princess May's own hand rattled against its saucer. The color drained from her powdered face. She stared at my mother, her carefully crafted facade crumbling under the weight of such direct, unvarnished truth. Nobody in the capital ever spoke so plainly. I assure you, madam, Princess May stammered in a harsh whisper. I do not know what you are implying. I am not implying anything, my mother said softly, offering a warm smile. I am offering you a position. You utilize a doctorate-level understanding of chemistry to solve petty court disputes for a faction that does not appreciate your brilliance. It is a massive waste of your potential. Have you considered pharmaceuticals? Or running a cosmetic laboratory? The Lin family is expanding our commercial enterprises. We need a director of research and development. Someone with your knowledge of herbal properties could revolutionize the medical supply chain. Princess May sat frozen, her dark eyes wide. The concept of utilizing her botanical knowledge for legitimate commerce, rather than assassinations, had never once occurred to her. I watched the defensive posture melt away, replaced by overwhelming validation. She had spent her entire life hiding her brilliance in the shadows. Now, an incredibly wealthy businesswoman was offering her legitimacy, respect, and a dedicated research budget. Tears welled up in the young poisoner's eyes. She pulled out a small silk handkerchief and dabbed her face. She looked at the small wooden box containing the poison tea leaves, then pushed it firmly across the table, safely far away from our cups. A laboratory? Princess May asked, her voice trembling with emotion. With proper funding? And I would not have to attend any more of the Empress Dowager's dreadful poetry recitals. Full autonomy, my mother promised, sliding a blank bamboo slip and also a charcoal stick toward the princess. Draw up a list of the equipment you need. We can negotiate your starting salary immediately. The impending betrothal was completely forgotten. By the time the afternoon concluded, Princess May had formally accepted a position within the Lin family's expanding merchant guild. She departed our estate with a comprehensive business plan tucked into her silk sleeves, leaving the deadly world of palace intrigue behind for the satisfying realm of corporate research. We successfully neutralized a major threat, not through violence, but by offering her comprehensive dental benefits and a clear path to professional self-actualization. Chapter 9. The chill of autumn swept through the capital, signaling the highly anticipated Mid-Autumn Festival. This was not simply a cultural celebration featuring mooncakes and lanterns. It was a grueling political exhibition. Every noble family was strictly required to present a magnificent gift to the emperor during the grand evening banquet. It was an intense competition designed to demonstrate loyalty, wealth, and cultural sophistication before the court. A subpar gift would undoubtedly result in severe social humiliation and absolute political ruin. Our family convened in my minimalist bedroom to strategize our approach. My mother sat at my wooden desk, tapping her charcoal stick against a bamboo ledger. She immediately dismissed traditional gifting options without a second thought. Gold was considered too common and painfully cliché. Jade artifacts were boring, predictable, and lacked genuine innovative value. We needed something absolutely unprecedented. We needed a massive product launch that would completely disrupt the imperial court's rigid expectations. My father, whose hands were still calloused from his extensive plumbing installations in the western courtyard, suddenly slammed his palm flat against the tabletop. His eyes sparkled with the intense, slightly unhinged fervor of a lead engineer who had just discovered a massive structural loophole. He loudly declared that he would build a fully functional, mathematically precise timekeeping device. He wanted to construct an incredibly intricate, hand-carved wooden-geared clock entirely from scratch. The ancient capital relied exclusively on incredibly inaccurate water clocks and highly inconsistent sundials, which infuriated my father's modern sensibilities. A mechanical clock driven by heavy weights and a meticulously calibrated escapement mechanism would absolutely shatter their primitive understanding of physics and engineering. For the next 3 weeks, our quiet estate transformed into a high-security, top-secret manufacturing facility. Dad practically locked himself inside the western courtyard, demanding massive, continuous quantities of premium Zeton wood, highly polished brass fittings, and specialized carving tools imported from the southern provinces. Leo and I were drafted as his primary technical assistants. Leo utilized his extensive data analysis background to expertly calculate the exact gear ratios required for perfectly synchronous rotational speeds. I eagerly applied my advanced mathematical knowledge of functional spaces and geometry to meticulously draft the complex blueprints. I spent hours carefully measuring the precise circumference, optimal radius, and exact tooth spacing for each interlocking wheel to ensure absolute perfection. We worked late into the night, functioning exactly like a highly efficient modern startup racing toward an impossible, life-altering product deadline. While my father focused entirely on the internal mechanics, I took absolute control of the external aesthetic design. The emperor deeply appreciated visual grandeur, but I adamantly refused to let my father present his mechanical masterpiece in a garish, overly ornate shell. I insisted on a sleek, elegant wooden casing that beautifully highlighted the natural, rich grain of the premium Zeton wood. I directed our best carpenters to carve subtle, minimalist cloud motifs along the lower edges, ensuring the visual elements did not overpower the hypnotic, rhythmic movement of the exposed brass gears. I treated the entire project exactly like creating a complex, beautifully aligned visual progress bar, or a dynamic timer for one of my digital projects. I ensured every single structural element served a clear, harmonious purpose without any unnecessary clutter. We polished the brass components until they gleamed like solid gold under the candlelight. My mother simultaneously orchestrated a massive, covert marketing campaign, spreading subtle rumors through her merchant network about a heavenly device being constructed within our walls. She masterfully built unprecedented anticipation without ever revealing the actual product. The final product was absolutely breathtaking. It stood exactly 3 feet tall, representing a perfect, seamless marriage of brilliant mechanical engineering and sophisticated, soft modern design. The night of the grand banquet finally arrived, bringing a palpable sense of tension. The massive palace was illuminated by glowing silk lanterns floating in the cool autumn breeze. The central hall was packed tightly with arrogant nobles displaying giant pearls, imported coral reefs, and rare beast pelts. When the Lin family was called forward, the entire court leaned in simultaneously, expecting us to present another ridiculously expensive, useless trinket. Instead, my father carried the heavy wooden clock to the center of the room, placing it gently on a jade pedestal. The room fell completely silent as the brass pendulum began to swing with a rhythmic, deeply satisfying metallic tick-tock. My father stood very tall and delivered a flawless, highly technical, and confident presentation. He explained the complex mechanics of kinetic energy, gear synchronization, and precision timekeeping to a confused but captivated audience. He demonstrated how the clock flawlessly tracked hours, minutes, and the lunar phase with absolute mathematical certainty. The emperor stood up from his golden throne, his eyes wide with profound, childlike astonishment. He walked down the marble steps, completely mesmerized by the rhythmic turning of the brass gears. The court scholars gasped in disbelief, unable to comprehend the brilliant genius of the mechanical invention before them. The emperor turned to my father, a look of ultimate respect washing over his stern royal features. He immediately bypassed all standard protocol, raised his hand, and officially declared my father the head of the Ministry of Public Works. He granted him unprecedented political authority and an unlimited royal budget for future innovations. My father beamed with absolute, triumphant joy. He finally had the imperial funding required to completely modernize the capital's entirely inadequate municipal sewer system. Chapter 10. The deep, oppressive silence of the ancient capital at midnight was usually absolute, broken only by the occasional distant bark of a stray dog, or the rhythmic striking of the night watchman's wooden clapper. I was sitting at my sleek, unvarnished desk in my muted matcha green bedroom, bathed in the soft glow of a single, carefully shielded oil lamp. Sleep had eluded me, so I turned to the one thing that always brought my mind absolute clarity: advanced mathematics. I was currently using a thin brush and a stack of premium parchment to meticulously outline the foundational properties of a Hilbert space. In a world governed by unpredictable imperial whims and dramatic court politics, there was a profound, deeply comforting solace in the strict, undeniable rules of functional analysis. The concept of a complete vector space with a defined inner product felt incredibly grounding. I was just reaching the climax of a particularly elegant proof, visualizing the geometric distance between two vectors to find order in this chaotic reality, when a very distinct, decidedly unmathematical splat echoed from the western courtyard. I paused, my brush hovering over the parchment. I blew out my oil lamp, plunging my minimalist sanctuary into darkness, and silently crept toward the window. I pushed the pale pink linen blinds aside just a fraction of an inch to peer into the moonlit estate. The western courtyard, formerly known as my father's primary plumbing testing facility, was currently being infiltrated. 6 figures dressed in entirely black, form-fitting garments were attempting to navigate the perimeter. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized grace of highly trained killers. These were clearly elite assassins, likely hired by the remnants of the Wang family, or some other disgruntled political rival we had accidentally offended during our rapid rise to power. They carried short, curved blades that glinted menacingly under the moonlight. They expected a sleeping household guarded by incompetent, poorly trained estate security. They expected to slip in, eliminate the eccentric Minister Lin, and vanish into the night without leaving a single trace. Instead, they stepped directly into the most complex, highly pressurized hydrostatic trap ever constructed in the history of the dynasty. My father had spent the last 2 weeks expanding his water distribution network, creating a massive, interlocking maze of hollowed-out bamboo pipes, deep clay-lined trenches, and incredibly sensitive pressure release valves. From my vantage point on the second floor, the layout of the courtyard looked remarkably familiar. It did not look like a traditional defensive array. It looked exactly like an incredibly complex node tree built on the Fusion page of digital video editing software. Every trench was a connection path, and every wooden valve was a specific macro designed to execute a precise, localized action when triggered by an external input. The lead assassin, entirely unaware of the engineering nightmare he was stepping into, placed his foot precisely onto a seemingly loose paving stone. This stone was, in reality, a primary trigger node. A loud, mechanical clack echoed through the courtyard. Instantly, a massive bamboo pipe hidden behind a decorative scholar's rock burst open, unleashing a highly pressurized, horizontal geyser of freezing cold water directly into the assassin's chest. The sheer force of the water pressure launched the trained killer backward, sending him tumbling head over heels into a meticulously calculated, 2% grade drainage trench. His comrades immediately panicked, abandoning their stealth training. The second assassin leaped to the right, desperately seeking high ground, but his landing triggered a secondary macro valve. A hidden trapdoor snapped open, dropping him waist-deep into a holding tank designed to measure stagnant water evaporation rates. The remaining 4 assassins scrambled chaotically, blindly running through the maze. Every step they took connected a new node in my father's aquatic trap. Water sprayed from hidden vertical pipes, completely blinding them. Slick clay mud coated their expensive leather boots, utterly destroying their balance. They were caught in an inescapable, endlessly repeating loop of hydrostatic pressure and profound humiliation. By the time my mother calmly unlocked the heavy wooden doors of the main house and stepped onto the viewing veranda, holding a glowing paper lantern in one hand and her ubiquitous bamboo clipboard in the other, the elite assassination squad was completely defeated. They were entirely soaked, shivering violently, and huddled together in the center of a drained reservoir, looking like a group of exceptionally miserable, drowned rats. My father emerged from his workshop, tying a cotton robe over his sleepwear. He looked down into the reservoir, deeply annoyed. Do you have any idea how long it took me to calibrate the outflow metrics for that specific basin? You have completely thrown off the entire night's data collection. The cubic volume measurements are absolutely ruined. The lead assassin, coughing up a mouthful of muddy water, looked up at my father with an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. What dark sorcery is this? What demon designed this array? It is basic fluid dynamics, my father snapped back, utterly offended. My mother sighed, stepping forward and shining the lantern light directly onto the shivering assassins. She did not call for the city guards. She did not order an execution. Instead, she flipped to a fresh bamboo slip on her clipboard. I am formally instituting a night shift patrol protocol, my mother announced, her voice ringing with absolute, indisputable corporate authority. Your stealth infiltration skills were barely adequate, but your spatial awareness and situational adaptability are catastrophically poor. The Lin family is rapidly expanding our commercial operations. We require a dedicated, highly specialized loss prevention team for our new tea warehouses. The assassins simply stared at her, too cold and traumatized to comprehend the words. Here is the offer, she continued smoothly, tapping her charcoal stick against the board. I will provide a starting operational budget of 15,000 copper coins to equip your division properly. You will receive comprehensive dental benefits, a standardized uniform that is not completely black, and 2 mandated break periods per shift. In exchange, you work exclusively for us. If you decline, I will leave you in this reservoir, and my husband will begin testing the high-pressure sewage ejection system. The lead assassin looked at the terrifying bamboo pipes surrounding them, then at my mother's completely serious face. He dropped his curved blade into the mud. Does the dental plan cover cracked molars? He rasped. It covers all preventative and restorative care, my mother confirmed. And just like that, the most feared assassins in the capital became our newest salaried employees. I returned to my desk, picked up my brush and smiled. Functional analysis was beautiful, but there was truly nothing more satisfying than watching my mother successfully close a high-stakes corporate negotiation. Chapter 11. The sudden, exponential growth of the Lin family's wealth was a statistical anomaly that could not remain hidden for long. My mother had ruthlessly streamlined our agricultural assets, completely monopolized the regional tea distribution network, and established a highly lucrative merchant guild managed by a board of directors comprised entirely of reformed assassins. We were generating unprecedented revenue. Naturally, this massive influx of unrecorded capital attracted the immediate, highly suspicious attention of the Imperial Ministry of Revenue. They were the most feared bureaucratic entity in the ancient capital, possessing the authority to completely ruin entire noble houses with a single accusation of tax evasion or financial embezzlement. They arrived unannounced on a gloomy Thursday morning. A contingent of 20 heavily armed Imperial guards surrounded our estate while 3 stern-faced, deeply arrogant Imperial auditors marched directly into our newly renovated reception hall. They wore official green robes adorned with silver-embroidered coins, and they carried massive, heavy wooden chests filled with official state ledgers. They fully expected to intimidate us into submission, confiscate our assets, and drag my father to the Imperial dungeons for questioning. I sat next to my mother at her minimalist wooden desk, nervously gripping my porcelain teacup. The lead auditor, a sour-looking man named Minister Zhao, slammed a massive stack of carved bamboo slips onto the table. First, Madam Lin, Minister Zhao sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. The Ministry of Revenue has identified severe, inexplicable discrepancies in your family's recent tax declarations. Your reported income mathematically cannot support your recent acquisitions. We are formally initiating a full financial audit of the Lin estate. Prepare your ledgers. If we find evidence of embezzlement, your entire family will be exiled. My mother did not flinch. She slowly set down her charcoal stick. She looked at Minister Zhao, then at the massive wooden chests of imperial ledgers his assistants were carrying. A cold, terrifying smile slowly spread across her face. It was the exact smile of a seasoned corporate auditor, who had just been handed a poorly fabricated expense report by a junior employee. You wish to conduct a financial audit, Minister Zhao? My mother asked smoothly, leaning forward. That is perfectly acceptable. We value absolute financial transparency. However, to properly cross-reference our regional tea export tariffs with the imperial tax code, I must first verify the baseline metrics of your own state ledgers. I need to ensure your standardized tax rates are mathematically sound before I submit my private accounts for your review. Minister Zhao scoffed loudly. You dare question the mathematics of the imperial treasury? Our ledgers are flawless. They have been maintained by the finest scholars in the dynasty for 10 generations. We will see, my mother said softly. She snapped her fingers. Leo, bring me the master abacus and the blank bamboo sheets. For the next 4 hours, the reception hall became a battlefield of pure, unadulterated numerical warfare. My mother demanded that Minister Zhao's assistants open their heavy wooden chests and read the imperial tax records aloud. She did not just review the current year. She aggressively demanded historical data stretching back an entire decade. Leo stood beside her, his fingers flying across the wooden beads of the master abacus with blinding speed, translating the archaic taxation figures into structured data points. I sat nearby, using a thin brush to quickly sketch out a graphical representation of their reported tax yields over time. I plotted the revenue numbers on a Cartesian coordinate system, connecting the data points to visualize the overall financial trend. It was immediately obvious that the ministry's mathematical models were fundamentally broken. Minister Zhao, my mother declared, her voice ringing like a steel blade. Your localized tax collection strategy is profoundly inefficient. You are taxing raw silk exports at a flat rate rather than implementing a tiered, progressive scale based on cubic volume. Furthermore, your historical ledgers from exactly 7 years ago show a massive, unexplained deficit in the agricultural sector that magically disappears the following spring. That is not a clerical error. That is systemic, heavily coordinated embezzlement within your own department. Minister Zhao turned the color of spoiled milk. He began to sweat profusely, his arrogant demeanor completely shattering. That is impossible. You cannot possibly deduce such a thing from a cursory glance. It is incredibly basic data analysis, Leo interjected, pushing his abacus aside. Your standard deviation is completely off the charts. Your revenue models do not account for seasonal inflation, and whoever is balancing your provincial accounts is clearly siphoning off exactly 3% of the total yield before reporting the final numbers to the emperor. We have tracked the missing funds directly to the southern trade routes. If I presented this highly inaccurate, fraudulently manipulated ledger to my shareholders, I would be immediately terminated, my mother stated coldly, standing up from her desk. She picked up a stack of our perfectly organized bamboo spreadsheets and held them out. Now, do you still wish to audit my family's private accounts? The terrified imperial auditors were completely paralyzed with fear. They instantly realized that my mother could expose their internal corruption. Without speaking a single word, Minister Zhao bowed deeply. He signaled his assistants, who scrambled to gather their heavy wooden chests. The feared Ministry of Revenue fled, absolutely terrified of the First Madam's demonic arithmetic and analysis. We simply returned to our warm tea, completely unbothered overall. Chapter 12. Winter descended upon the ancient capital with a sudden, biting ferocity. Frost coated the willow trees in our courtyard, and a thick blanket of pristine white snow transformed the bustling city into a silent, frozen painting. Within the high walls of the Lin family estate, however, we were experiencing an unprecedented level of comfort and warmth. My father had successfully completed his most ambitious infrastructure project to date, a fully integrated, centralized radiant floor heating system. By channeling hot water from a central, wood-fired boiler through a network of meticulously sealed clay pipes buried directly beneath the polished floorboards, he had eliminated the need for smoky, dangerous indoor braziers. I was currently sitting on the floor of my minimalist bedroom, comfortably barefoot, reviewing a complex set of ordinary differential equations regarding heat dissipation rates, when a frantic pounding echoed from the main gates. The heavy wooden doors were thrown open, revealing a terrifyingly pale imperial eunuch. He did not bother with the usual flowery greetings or dramatic scroll presentations. He collapsed onto his knees in the snowy courtyard, gasping for breath. The crown prince, the sole heir to the dynasty and the emperor's most beloved son, had fallen gravely ill. A mysterious, invisible poison was ravaging his body, and every single physician in the royal hospital had completely failed to cure him. The emperor, remembering my father's supposed mystical alchemy and our family's rapidly growing reputation for impossible miracles, had issued an emergency summons. We were ordered to the palace immediately. The carriage ride to the inner city was tense and completely silent. My mother sat with her eyes closed, mentally outlining a comprehensive crisis management protocol and calculating the political fallout if the crown prince actually died while under our supposed care. Leo nervously tapped his fingers against his knees, whispering probabilities and statistical mortality rates under his breath. My father, completely unbothered by the looming threat of execution, was actively complaining about the lack of shock absorbers on the imperial carriage. When we arrived at the crown prince's private pavilion, the atmosphere was one of absolute, suffocating despair. Elite guards stood frozen at attention, their faces grim. High-ranking ministers wept openly in the snowy courtyard. The emperor himself paced furiously outside the heavy wooden doors, his imperial robes deeply wrinkled, looking like a terrified, utterly helpless father. He immediately grabbed my father's hands, begging him to utilize his hidden Taoist magic to save the dying boy. We were ushered into the bedchamber, and the moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind us, I felt an intense, physical wave of nausea wash over me. The room was practically a sealed vault. Every single window was tightly shuttered and sealed with thick layers of heavily oiled paper to keep out the winter draft. Thick, oppressive velvet curtains were drawn tight. To combat the severe cold, the royal servants had placed 4 massive, ornate charcoal braziers around the perimeter of the bed. The coals glowed a bright, furious red, generating a stifling, dizzying wave of heat. The air was incredibly thick, heavy, and tasted faintly of ash and metal. The crown prince lay motionless in the center of the massive canopy bed. His skin was terrifyingly pale, completely devoid of color, except for his lips, which were tinted a sickly, unnatural shade of cherry red. His chest barely moved, his breathing incredibly shallow and erratic. 3 elderly royal physicians knelt beside him, checking his pulse and weeping. "It is a dark miasma," the head physician cried out, bowing his head to the floor. "A terrible, invisible poison sent by evil spirits. His young energy is completely depleted. We have tried everything. We burned extra herbs, we closed all the vents to trap his remaining spiritual essence, but the dark magic is simply too strong." My father did not look at the dying prince. He did not look at the weeping physicians. He looked directly at the massive glowing charcoal braziers, then at the tightly sealed windows, and finally at the total lack of a ventilation chimney. His eyes widened in absolute, profound horror. "Are you people completely out of your minds?" my father roared, his voice shattering the mournful silence of the room. Before the imperial guards could draw their swords to strike him down for his blatant disrespect, my father sprinted across the room. He bypassed the royal bed entirely, grabbed a heavy wooden stool, and violently smashed it directly through the tightly sealed paper window. The cold, crisp winter air rushed into the suffocating room like a physical shockwave. He did not stop there. He ran to the opposite side of the chamber, violently kicking open the heavy wooden doors that led to the private balcony. "Put out those fires immediately," my father commanded, pointing furiously at the glowing braziers. "Get them out of this room right now." "You cannot," the head physician shrieked in terror. "The cold will shatter his fragile meridians. The heat must be maintained to sweat out the invisible poison." "There is no invisible poison," my father yelled back, grabbing a bucket of drinking water and unceremoniously dumping it directly over the largest brazier. A massive hiss of steam erupted into the air. "It is severe carbon monoxide poisoning. You have sealed a human being inside an unventilated box with 4 active combustion sources. The charcoal is burning up all the oxygen in the room and replacing it with toxic gas. You are mathematically suffocating him to death." The emperor, who had rushed into the room upon hearing the shattering glass, stood frozen in shock. My father ignored all royal protocol. He grabbed the heavy velvet blankets, wrapped the unconscious crown prince tightly, and physically carried the boy directly toward the shattered window, exposing his face to the freezing, oxygen-rich winter air. "Breathe, kid," my father muttered, carefully checking the boy's pulse. For 10 agonizing minutes, the room was completely silent except for the howling winter wind rushing through the broken window. We all held our breath. Slowly, miraculously, the sickly cherry-red color began to fade from the prince's lips. His chest heaved with a sudden, desperate gasp. The crown prince opened his eyes, coughing violently as the fresh oxygen finally reached his deeply starved brain. The emperor collapsed to his knees, weeping tears of absolute joy. The royal physicians stared at my father in profound, terrified awe, completely convinced he had just performed an exorcism of unprecedented power. They could not comprehend the basic chemical principles of oxygen and carbon monoxide, but they absolutely understood the result. The crown prince was alive. My father simply dusted the charcoal ash off his robes and turned to the emperor. "Your Majesty, your son is going to be perfectly fine. However, your palace architecture is fundamentally flawed. If you do not allow me to immediately redesign your entire chimney ventilation system, you are going to lose half your court by the spring thaw." Chapter 13. Our sudden transformation from harmless, eccentric merchants to untouchable, miracle-working geniuses had a bizarre unintended consequence. The capital's gossip mill went into overdrive. Every movement we made was now analyzed, romanticized, and distorted beyond all recognition. My mother's efficient management style was no longer seen as good business sense. It was whispered about as a form of demonic mental command that allowed her to see into the souls of her employees. My father's plumbing projects were no longer considered engineering feats, but rather arcane earth-bending techniques that allowed him to reshape the very ground beneath the city. The rumors regarding me were perhaps the most ridiculous. Because I enjoyed spending my time reading, writing, and cultivating a quiet, minimalist atmosphere, the city decided I was a reclusive, poetic prodigy. It was said that I could speak to the flowers in our garden, and that my calligraphy possessed the power to calm the wildest beasts. I once heard a maidservant whispering that my refusal to attend the Empress Dowager's parties was actually a profound, spiritual protest against the falseness of the mortal realm. Leo, meanwhile, had been elevated to the status of a mysterious, brooding martial arts savant. Because he often showed up at our house at odd hours, usually to drop off financial data or complain about the lack of modern amenities, people assumed he was conducting secret nighttime training sessions to protect the city from invisible demons. The fact that he was actually just venting about his inability to find decent coffee in this century was lost on everyone. We became a terrifying, fascinating mystery to the local elite. Noble families that once snubbed us now scrambled to secure invitations to our rare, low-key tea gatherings. They arrived at our gates with gifts of rare incense and ancient scrolls, hoping to catch a glimpse of our hidden powers. They sat in our minimalist reception hall, speaking in hushed, reverent tones, desperate to decode our supposed secrets. I heard the first madam uses ancient, forbidden incantations to balance her books. One minister whispered to another while sitting on a simple bamboo chair. "That is why her tea houses are never empty. She is not attracting customers, she is casting spells of prosperity." And the young miss, a noblewoman added, casting a nervous glance my way as I calmly sipped tea and read a book on basic geometry. "They say she does not actually write poetry. They say she is transcribing the language of the celestial stars themselves." I bit my lip, forcing myself not to laugh. I was reading a book on the derivation of the Pythagorean theorem, but I suppose that was a type of celestial language. "I can't take it," Leo hissed, leaning toward me while pretending to be deep in thought. "I heard a merchant today ask if I could teach him how to walk on water, because he saw me stepping carefully across the lily pads in the koi pond to avoid getting my silk boots muddy. I'm literally just trying to walk without falling in." "Just nod sagely," I whispered back, masking my smile behind my teacup. "If they think you're a brooding genius, they won't ask you to explain your data spreadsheets." The irony was that while the city buzzed with rumors of our mystical prowess, we were just trying to live our lives. We didn't want to rule the capital, and we certainly didn't want to be worshipped. We wanted to eat our dinner in peace, enjoy the warm water that now flowed through our properly ventilated estate, and perhaps, if we were very lucky, figure out why we had been sent here in the first place. But the more we tried to be normal, the more magical we seemed. When my mother finally decided to franchise our tea houses, the city viewed it as an expansion of our spiritual territory. When my father finally succeeded in convincing the emperor to install a basic public sanitation system in the capital, it was hailed as a great cleansing of the city's negative energy. We were untouchable. The capital whispered about the Lin family. The father, a hidden martial arts grandmaster and eccentric genius. The mother, a strategic demon who controlled the underworld's security. And the heir, a poetic prodigy who spoke in riddles. We eventually stopped trying to fight the rumors. It was exhausting, and honestly, the reputation had its benefits. No one dared challenge our business practices, no one dared criticize our fashion choices, and the Wang family, who once tried to bankrupt us, now sent us tribute every month just to ensure we didn't accidentally curse their estate. One evening, as the moon rose over the capital, we sat around a fully functional, properly ventilated fireplace that Dad had built in the main hall. The house was quiet, filled with the gentle, rhythmic hum of the estate's new water system. Mom was reviewing the quarterly earnings of our newly acquired tea houses, her brow furrowed in concentration, while Dad was sketching out a design for a new, water-powered street lantern. "You know," Dad said, finally putting down his charcoal, "people think we're gods. But at the end of the day, I'm just a guy who really likes a working shower. And I'm just a woman who wants a balanced ledger," Mom added, smiling. I looked at them, then at the flickering light of the fireplace. It wasn't our old life. It wasn't our old world. But as I watched my family, the only people who knew the truth, the only people who understood that we were just normal, pragmatic, slightly annoyed modern humans, I realized something. We were home. And we were definitely going to win. Chapter 14. Winter had finally loosened its grip on the capital, and the first buds of spring were beginning to peek through the frost-bitten soil of our inner courtyard. The transition from the harsh, biting cold to the gentle warmth of the new season mirrored the transition of our lives within the Lin Manor. We had stopped living in a state of perpetual, high-stakes emergency. The palace was no longer a place of looming execution. It was simply a problematic client that required regular maintenance. The political rivals who once plotted our downfall now sent quarterly reports on their market share, hoping for guidance on how to optimize their own logistics. Our estate was no longer just a house. It was a testament to the intersection of ancient craftsmanship and modern efficiency. I sat at my desk, which was positioned perfectly to capture the soft, golden light of the afternoon sun. I had finally finished redecorating the entire wing, replacing the last remnants of the heavy, dark mahogany with sleek, light-colored bamboo furniture that felt clean, modern, and breathable. My shelves were lined with meticulously organized bamboo scrolls, categorized not by their flowery titles, but by their content: agriculture, commerce, political intelligence, and personal notes. I felt a deep, profound sense of accomplishment every time I looked at the order I had brought to my small corner of this world. Leo had successfully integrated himself into our daily routine, although he still complained bitterly about the lack of high-speed internet. He spent his mornings in the reception hall, which had been converted into a high-functioning data analysis center. He and his team of former assassins, who turned out to be surprisingly adept at pattern recognition and logistical surveillance, spent their hours mapping trade routes and optimizing the flow of goods across the empire. They were the most efficient intelligence network in the history of the dynasty, and they did it all using simple abacuses and a very organized system of coded bamboo slips. My father was, as always, in the western courtyard. He had moved on from internal plumbing to the broader issue of municipal infrastructure. He was currently leading a massive, state-funded project to overhaul the capital's drainage system. He was a local celebrity, often seen walking through the muddy trenches in his simple cotton tunic, shouting technical instructions to imperial laborers who looked at him with a mix of terror and absolute devotion. He was the happiest I had ever seen him. He had a royal budget, a workforce of thousands, and the freedom to redesign an entire city's layout according to his exact specifications. He didn't care about the palace politics or the social standing of the Lin family. He cared about the flow rate of the city's main artery and the structural integrity of the stone bridges. My mother, the true architect of our success, was currently in the tea room, hosting a meeting of the Capital Merchant Guild. The most powerful trade lords in the empire were sitting on the floor, listening intently as she explained the principles of diversified investment portfolios and long-term risk management. She was no longer just the first madam of a noble house. She was the de facto economic advisor to the entire empire. She had built a commercial empire that was too large to fail, ensuring our family's safety by making our success synonymous with the empire's financial stability. I set down my brush and walked out onto the veranda. The koi pond was clear and tranquil, the water circulating through a miniature version of my father's filtration system. The air was sweet with the scent of plum blossoms, and the silence of the manor was peaceful, not ominous. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension that had lived in my shoulders for months finally dissipate. I looked up at the sky. It was the same blue, the same clouds, the same vast expanse that I had looked at from my bedroom window back home. The context had changed, the rules of the game were entirely different, and the amenities were, despite my father's heroic efforts, still somewhat lacking. But we had not just survived, we had thrived. We had taken a chaotic, unfamiliar world and bent it to our will, applying the logic, the ethics, and the pragmatism of our previous life to build something entirely new. We were no longer lost souls in a strange land. We were the Lin family, and we were the architects of our own destiny. Everything on track? Leo asked, walking up behind me, wiping ink from his fingers. He looked tired, but he also looked purposeful. He wasn't the frantic, panicking stranger who had crashed into our manor those first few days. He was the chief of a logistics empire. Everything is perfect, I said, leaning against the wooden railing. The logistics are running, the finances are stable, and Dad is currently re-engineering the city gate's hinge system. Leo laughed, a genuine, relaxed sound. He really does love his hinges. He does, I agreed. And Mom is currently negotiating a trade deal that will effectively double our profits by the next harvest, Leo said, shaking his head in admiration. She is literally unstoppable. We stood there for a long time, watching the sun begin to set over the garden. There was no more mystery about where we were or why we were here. Perhaps there was no grand reason, no divine purpose, no hidden quest to fulfill. Maybe we were just people who, when dropped into a different environment, did what we always did. We analyzed, we adapted, and we improved. We didn't need a system or a destiny. We had our family, our skills, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, no matter where we were, we could build a life that felt like home. I think I'm going to write that down, I said, turning back toward my desk. The 14th chapter of our story. Make sure you include the part about the boar, Leo called after me. That was the highlight of my year. I smiled, stepped back into my room, and began to write. The ink flowed smoothly, capturing the details of our new life. It was a story of success, of persistence, and of the realization that even in a world of silk robes and ancient court politics, the most powerful tool you could have was a calm, organized mind. And of course a really good set of blueprints. Epilogue. 3 years later, the Lin family manor stood as a testament to the fact that when you apply rigorous logic and modern efficiency to a historical setting, the results are nothing short of revolutionary. We were no longer viewed as mere nobles. We were the architects of a new era. Dad had successfully completed the capital's sanitation overhaul. The city was finally free of the chronic illnesses that had plagued it for centuries, and he was currently engaged in a heated, highly technical debate with the Imperial Ministry of Construction regarding the mandatory implementation of standardized paving stones across all major trade routes. He treated the Emperor's court like a municipal zoning board, and to everyone's absolute shock, the Emperor actually listened to his proposals because the results were undeniably superior. Mom had become the undisputed queen of the capital's commerce. She had essentially monopolized the silk, tea, and ceramic trades, running a merchant guild that operated with the clinical precision of a multinational corporation. She had a board of directors, staffed entirely by former elite assassins who had traded their blades for high-level supply chain management. And she had single-handedly stabilized the empire's currency by implementing a standardized ledger system. The other merchant families didn't even attempt to compete with her. They simply asked for partnership contracts, terrified of her legendary demonic arithmetic. As for me, I had carved out my own niche as the imperial advisor. I didn't hold a traditional title, but I held the absolute trust of the throne. I spent my days analyzing court politics with the same detached, objective focus I once applied to advanced mathematics. When disputes erupted over land rights or trade tariffs, the ministers would come to me, and I would present them with a clear, data-backed solution that made everyone's job significantly easier. I had learned that when you remove the ego and the obsession with prestige, most ancient problems were just inefficient systems waiting for a proper optimization. We never discovered the mechanism behind our arrival. There was no glowing portal, no cryptic message from a divine system, and no explanation for why we had been plucked from our comfortable lives and dropped into a world of silk and intrigue. But as I sat in the courtyard on a warm summer evening, listening to the gentle, rhythmic splash of the bamboo water feature Dad had installed, and watching Mom cross-reference the annual harvest yields with a terrifyingly sharp, satisfied smile, I realized that the why didn't matter. We had created our own meaning. We had taken the absurdity of our situation and transformed it into a life of purpose and profound satisfaction. We hadn't changed who we were. We had simply upgraded our environment to better suit our pragmatic natures. As I looked over at Leo, who was currently laughing at a letter he had received from a regional trade commissioner regarding shipping logistics, I felt a deep, enduring sense of peace. We were a family of analysts, engineers, and strategists. We were people who looked at a chaotic, broken world and saw only a series of complex problems that were, with enough time and effort, entirely solvable. Turns out, you can take the family out of the modern world, but you absolutely cannot take the modern pragmatism out of the family. We weren't just surviving in this dynasty, we were running it. And honestly, it had never been more efficiently managed. We were sitting in our beautifully minimalist, warmly lit central courtyard, enjoying a perfectly ventilated evening fire. My father was proudly explaining the tensile strength of the new suspension bridge he was building over the Southern River. My mother was elegantly pouring premium, flawlessly sourced matcha into our delicate porcelain cups. It was a moment of absolute peace. We had conquered this world. We had finally, truly accepted that this opulent, complex dynasty was our forever home. And then the universe simply glitched. It did not happen with a dramatic explosion or a blinding flash of divine light. It began as a strange, deeply unsettling drop in atmospheric pressure. The gentle rhythmic splash of the bamboo water feature suddenly distorted, stretching out into a bizarre, metallic electronic hum. The silver moonlight reflecting off the surface of the koi pond fractured, breaking apart into thousands of tiny, sharp, glowing pixels. I froze, my porcelain teacup hovering halfway to my mouth. I looked at my mother. Her crimson silk robes were vibrating violently, phasing in and out of existence at an impossible frequency. "Dad," I whispered, but my voice sounded entirely wrong, echoing as if I were speaking from underwater. The fragrant, cloying scent of crushed orchids and burning sandalwood was violently ripped away, instantly replaced by the sharp, sterile, unmistakable chill of Freon. The solid wooden pillars of the courtyard dissolved into geometric wireframes. The world folded in on itself, and everything snapped to a terrifying, absolute black. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I violently kicked out my legs, expecting to feel the heavy, oppressive layers of silk bedding. Instead, my feet tangled in a thin mass-produced cotton duvet. I wasn't staring up at an intricately carved canopy bed. I was staring at the familiar, slightly water-damaged popcorn ceiling of my actual bedroom. I scrambled upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I frantically patted my own arms. No wide, flowing robes. I was wearing my oversized, faded university t-shirt. The aesthetic, muted matcha green decor I had painstakingly curated was gone, replaced by my modern, messy bedroom. I grabbed my smartphone from the nightstand. The screen lit up, momentarily blinding me with harsh blue light. The lock screen displayed the date and time. It was the exact same Sunday morning we had supposedly woken up in ancient China. 0 time had passed. I threw off my blankets and sprinted out of my room, my bare feet slapping loudly against the hardwood floor of our modern suburban hallway. I nearly collided with Leo, who was bursting out of the guest bedroom. He was not wearing a pristine jade crown or flowing lavender silk. He was dressed in gray sweatpants, his dark hair a chaotic, tangled bird's nest. "The abacus!" Leo yelled, his voice cracking with pure hysteria as he pointed a trembling finger at me. "Mom made me use a literal bamboo abacus to calculate compound interest for 3 entire years. I had a corner office made of zeton wood." Before I could even process his panic, the door to the master bedroom flew open. My mother marched out into the hallway. She was clutching a modern, plastic clipboard to her chest like a protective shield, her eyes incredibly wide with unprecedented, absolute shock. My father was right behind her, aggressively gripping a completely standard, stainless steel pipe wrench. "Where is my aqueduct?" my father demanded loudly, looking wildly around the narrow, carpeted hallway. I was just about to finalize the mortar mixture for the southern drainage basin. We were going to revolutionize their sanitation. We all froze, staring at each other in the dim morning light. The silence in the hallway was deafening, broken only by the low, mechanical drone of the central air conditioning unit. "Ooh, was that real?" I breathed, sliding down the drywall until I hit the floor. "Please tell me I didn't just imagine an entire life." "We couldn't all have had the exact same dream," my mother said, her impenetrable corporate composure finally cracking. Her hands shook as she gripped her plastic clipboard. It is statistically and biologically impossible. I remember the Wang family's exact profit margins. I remember the specific tax rate of the southern provinces. I remember hiring assassins and giving them dental benefits. I remember the precise hydrostatic pressure of the trap that caught them, my father whispered, slowly lowering the wrench. It hit the floorboard with a dull, incredibly modern thud. I remember the Emperor's face when I fixed the chimney. We slowly moved into the living room, collapsing onto our cheap, polyester sectional couch in a collective daze. There was no glowing system interface hovering in the air. There was no magical, glowing book sitting open on the coffee table. There was absolutely no grand, divine explanation waiting for us. We had no idea what had just happened. Had we been temporarily pulled into an alternate parallel universe? Had we been digitally sucked into the plot of a transmigration web novel? Was it a highly advanced, hyper-realistic simulation triggered by the immersive escape room we had visited the day before? We simply did not know. The only tangible proof we possessed were the vivid, 3-year-long memories permanently burned into our minds. Leo stared at his blank smartphone screen, then looked up at us, his eyes still wide with disbelief. Well, what do we do now? My mother sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the blank, modern television screen. Slowly, she took a deep breath. She straightened her posture, and that familiar, terrifyingly sharp strategic gleam returned to her eyes. First, she declared, her voice regaining its absolute commanding authority, we are going to conduct a full audit of our current household budget. And then, we are going to look into aggressively dominating the modern tea import business. The Wang family is not here to stop us. The silence in the living room stretched on, comfortable yet profoundly heavy with the weight of 3 unrecorded years. My mother's bold declaration about dominating the modern tea import business hung in the air, a perfect echo of the fierce first madam we had all come to deeply respect. But as the adrenaline of our abrupt temporal displacement slowly began to fade, the sheer, overwhelming reality of what we had just experienced settled over us like a soft, warm blanket. We were back. We were home. My father was the first to move. He slowly stood up from the polyester sectional, his bare feet padding softly against the hardwood floor as he walked into the kitchen. We watched him in silence as he approached the stainless steel sink. He reached out a trembling hand and gently lifted the handle of the faucet. A stream of crystal clear, perfectly pressurized, temperature-regulated water flowed effortlessly into the basin. My father stared at it for a long, quiet moment. Then, to my absolute shock, a single tear slipped down his cheek. Do you have any idea, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, how many localized pressure valves I would have had to carve out of solid oak to achieve this exact flow rate? He turned off the water, resting his hands heavily on the granite countertop. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Leo looked down at his smartphone. The lock screen was flooded with dozens of notifications, emails from his tech firm, alerts from his crypto wallet, and messages from his data analytics team. It was the digital lifeline he had spent 3 years desperately yearning for. He stared at the glowing screen for a few seconds. Then, very deliberately, he reached out and pressed the power button, silencing the device. He placed the phone face down on the coffee table. He moved across the living room and collapsed onto the couch next to me, throwing his arm around my shoulders in a tight, genuine hug. There was no more whining about ancient grooming standards or missing dual monitors. There was just my big brother, holding on to me as if I were the only real thing in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. I'm really glad you were there, Leo murmured softly, resting his chin on the top of my head. If I had to deal with the Wang family's financial ledgers without you writing out those mathematical models, I would have absolutely lost my mind. I leaned into his shoulder, a profound sense of warmth blooming in my chest. I'm glad you were there too, Leo. Even if you were a terribly unconvincing tragic romantic hero. My mother looked at the two of us, her sharp, calculating corporate persona finally melting away completely. She looked down at the plastic clipboard in her hands, her modern armor, and slowly placed it on the coffee table next to Leo's silence phone. Before the transmigration, our family had loved each other, but we had existed in our own separate, busy orbits. Dad was always at a construction site, Mom was always in a boardroom, Leo was buried in his data screens, and I was locked in my room studying advanced functional analysis. We shared a roof, but we rarely shared a life. Ancient China had forced us together. It had stripped away our modern distractions and forced us to rely entirely on each other's unique, eccentric strengths just to survive. My mother walked over and wrapped her arms around both me and Leo. A second later, my father left his marvel of modern plumbing and joined the embrace, his large arms enveloping all of us in a massive, grounding family hug. We stood there in the middle of our completely ordinary, suburban living room, holding on to each other, deeply changed. "We did well," my mother whispered, her voice surprisingly soft, lacking any of her usual commanding edge. Whatever it was, a dream, a parallel universe, a glitch in the cosmos, we did it together. And we were magnificent. "We really were," my father agreed, kissing the top of my mother's head. "Though I am going to miss that Zeton wood. The grain on that timber was truly spectacular." We eventually broke apart, wiping tears from our eyes and laughing at the absolute absurdity of our morning. The world outside our window was just waking up. Cars were driving down the street, and the distant hum of a lawnmower echoed through the neighborhood. "So," I said, wiping a rogue tear from my cheek and looking around at my incredible, impossible family. "What happens now? Do we tell anyone?" "Absolutely not," my mother said immediately, her practical nature returning. "They would lock us in a psychiatric ward. No, this remains a highly classified internal family asset. A closed network." She smiled, a genuine, radiant expression. "But first things first. Who wants breakfast?" "I'll make it," I volunteered, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I think we all deserve a proper, aesthetically pleasing morning. I'll whisk up some matcha lattes, and we can make those fluffy pancakes Dad loves." "Perfect," Leo said, leaning back onto the couch with a contented sigh. "Just, whatever you do, don't serve me any lotus pastries. If I see another lotus pastry, I am moving to a different continent." As I walked into our modern kitchen, listening to my father enthusiastically explain the mechanics of the refrigerator's Freon loop to my mother, I smiled. We didn't know how or why we had been sent to that ancient manor. We might never know. But as I pulled our favorite ceramic mugs from the cupboard, I realized it didn't matter. The transmigration wasn't a punishment, and it wasn't just a bizarre dream. It was exactly what we hadn't known we needed. It was a 3-year family retreat that had taught us the most valuable lesson in the universe. No matter what century we were in, and no matter what absurd challenges the world threw at us, as long as we were together, we were already home. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.